Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Gator Studios for another educational training. My name is Chris Morsey. I'm the Northeast Sales Manager with Alliance. With me is the absolute GOAT, Mike Huber. And then over on the computer, Zach McQuinney. Can we get a shot of Zach there, Tim? There he is. He's from Boston. Boston in the house. All right. Well, thank you for attending week 2. Today we're going to go over a countdown of the most terrible polysand mistakes. But before we get too ahead, let's take a look at our agenda.
All right, so today we're going to go through kind of the characteristics of a polymeric sand, how it works, what it does, and why we use it. Make sure we're all on the same page. Talk about those common polymeric sand mistakes and why they occur. We see them over and over again. And at the same time, we'll address how to prevent those mistakes on future projects. Nobody wants failed polymeric sand, Chris.
Absolutely not. And then I see the chat's been kind of blowing up here. Keep those questions coming throughout. We're going to try to answer as much as we can. Zach is going to keep an eye on that. If we're not able to answer a question for you, our local rep or your local rep will get with you at some point and make sure that you have the information that you need.
All right, excellent. So Chris, what is polymeric sand? Why are we using this stuff?
Sand with glue in it, right, Mike?
Right. Sand with glue. We got a powdered glue, the polymers, mixed with sand. We put it in paver joints. We wet it down. It hardens up kind of like a flexible grout, preventing weeds, erosion, and burrowing insects. But there are some misconceptions out there. A lot of people think that polymeric sand is just like grout. It's supposed to be hard like concrete.
Yeah, there's no concrete or cement in this product whatsoever. This product is made to cycle. It's made to get wet, absorb that moisture, become soft, become flexible in your system, because these are technically flexible paving systems that you're building. But as that sun comes out or the higher temps come out and the humidity drops, it's going to dry again. It's going to self-heal if there are any hairline cracks. And then that process will pretty much recycle as long as the longevity of the product.
So what you're telling me is that when polymeric sands are dry, they might be pretty hard, but when they get wet, they could soften up a little bit?
Yeah, and that's by design. That's exactly what we're trying to look for.
All right, so if you take a look at my little sample stick of polymeric sand here, you can see that it's wet and it is flexible, right? If that was dry, it would be more rigid, it would crack, but we have flexibility in wet polymeric sand. And while that can be a problem on a soaking wet job site that never dries out, generally it's an advantage, right? That wet state allows us to have more flexibility, allows some self-healing of the product to occur, and interlocking concrete pavers are designed to flex and move a little bit, right? If we don't have a flexible joint material in there, we might be asking for some cracking to occur.
Some cracking, it gets pushed out of the joint, it doesn't really stay where it needs to go, then you have all sorts of problems that come afterwards.
All right. So I think we're all kind of on the same page with what a polymeric sand is supposed to be doing, but there are some maybe installation mistakes that lead to polymeric sand not performing as we expect. There could be some job site issues, some environmental concerns that cause polymeric sands to fail. We got a poll here for the audience.
Yeah, let's take a look at some mistakes that maybe you're experiencing, out there in the field.
So what's your number one mistake that you see out there? Number one issue? You have sand that's not drying out. It always stays wet, and you have soft joints. Do we have crust peeling out of those joints? Do you have a ton of moss, mold, and mildew growing on your polymeric sand? Maybe the sand joints are cracking?
Might be cracking a little bit.
So it looks kind of evenly split. There are probably some people out there that wanted to answer all of the above. We didn't give that option.
Yeah, I've noticed over the years, polysand doesn't have much popularity, especially on those Facebook forums.
Yeah, it seems pretty terrible if you read some of the issues that people have had, but really following the instructions and then thinking through your job site from the standpoint of evacuating that water and helping it dry out will go a long way towards eliminating all of those issues out there, including these that we have on screen.
Yeah. So why don't we break it down? Why don't we go through some of the mistakes and then maybe discuss how we can prevent them going forward, or maybe have a better understanding of why the mistakes are occurring? Why don't we start with the first one?
All right. So not using the correct sand would be the first mistake, Chris.
Yeah.
Starting with not using Alliance polymeric sand, right?
You must be using Alliance.
You ever buy the off-brand stuff and you were disappointed?
Of course not.
Oh, I have.
I don't use that.
Yeah. All right. So you've got to get the right polymeric sand for your job site. And that doesn't mean just buying Alliance Gator, but selecting the proper Alliance Gator product for your particular job site. So we've got different polymeric sands. We have polymeric stone dust. Take, for example, Eurostone. You might not use it every day, but if you're installing natural stone, Belgian block, cobblestone, that's the go-to product, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a product where it's like a one size fits all. We understand that, in the hardscape industry, there's a lot of different jobs out there. There's a lot of different ways of building, and there's a lot of different materials utilized. Like you mentioned Eurostone a second ago. Eurostone is phenomenal for like anything natural stone related, and then some wet cast products.
And even though you can do up to a 4-inch wide joint with our polymeric sands, I personally don't think you ever should. If you're doing a regular flagstone, you've got some really wide 3-4-inch wide joints.
6-inch.
Gator dust is a much better solution. Not only is it going to perform better, but it looks a heck of a lot better. A 4-inch wide polymeric sand joint starts looking fake and artificial. But Gator dust with the chips of stone really, really looks good.
Yep. But like today, we're going to discuss primarily our G2 product. So we have our, you'll see different brands of G2. You'll see our FlexLock, you'll see our Polybind, and then you'll see the Gator brand. These are the 3 most common products that are utilized out of our catalog. And frankly, because of the amount you guys are all purchasing, this is where we see the most mistakes. So,
well, it's also a newer product, right?
Yeah.
So with the G2, the technology has changed and the installation instructions have changed. And I think some people missed that message, Chris.
I think so, yeah. But this product's a little different in the regards that it has what we call rapid set technology.
So rapid set technology, what exactly is that, Chris?
So rapid set technology is basically a powderized catalyst that we put into this product to help it set up no matter what the humidity. Maybe there's a rainstorm coming later that day. We want that product to set up as much as possible before that rainstorm hits and has a potential chance to damage the joint itself.
All right, so what we have here, we wanted to get this little demo started for you, but I have 2 rings of plastic, and we've got about a 4-inch wide joint of G2 Gator Max. And with these 2 different rings, we're going to water them a little bit differently. So one side is going to kind of simulate that old 3-step watering process, misting it down, adding the second and third successive watering. And on the other side, we're going to give it a heavier watering, the correct G2 watering, 30 square feet for 30 seconds. But it makes a big difference with that rapid set technology. Unfortunately, if you use the old method on the new G2, you're going to have some problems, Chris.
Yeah, and the old method, and what we're talking about is, the word mist has always been on the instructions for a lot of different brands, not just ours, before G2 had come out. And mist, to me, is a very light amount of water.
Right. We should really be getting rid of that word mist. That shouldn't be in our vocabulary when you're talking about activating polymeric sands.
Yeah. We really want to heavily water this product. We'll get into it later on. We're definitely going to be talking about the correct watering process, but 30 seconds, 30 square feet at a shower setting on a hose nozzle.
Yep. We're going to want to get a lot of water in there. So I think, you've done a couple demonstrations of properly installing G2. Contractors always think that you're overwatering it, don't they?
Just about every single time. I always get stopped and they're like, you're putting way too much water on. And they always say, I'm going to wash out all of the polymer out of the product, which is not true, Mike.
All right. So what we're going to do is to kind of put these aside for right now, and we will look at them a little bit later once they've had a little bit of time to set up. But it is a, major problem, with that advantage of the rapid set technology, but the difference in watering, which results in a lot of different issues out there. Okay. So you got to choose the right sand, and when you choose that sand, you have to make sure that you read the instructions for that particular product, right, Chris?
Right. Not every installation is going to be the same across the product line or our product offering.
So where can we find the correct instructions?
Oh, I'll show you, Mike.
All right.
Here's one way you can look at the correct instructions, and that's on the bag itself. And if you could see here, it might be a little small, but you can see there's a lot of detail on this. There's a lot of literature on this. There's also pictures.
Pictures are good, right?
Yeah.
If we don't follow the written instructions, we can at least look at the pictures and make sure that we are following those steps.
Yeah.
Any of those steps on the back of the bag optional, Chris?
No, everything needs to be done in the exact way that we're explaining it on here for the longevity of the product to be where we want it to be.
Right, so it's important to check the back of the bag. Make sure that you're following the correct installation steps for that particular product. You can also take a look online, right on your smartphone there, on the computer, and go to the technical data sheet for any particular product, and that technical data sheet is going to give you the most up-to-date and thorough instructions. We can't put everything on the back of the bag. There's only so much space, but technical data sheet gives you all the details, all the fine points and tips and tricks to have a successful install.
And we have technical data sheets across our entire board of product line. So you'll be able to find the TDS for everything, installation instructions, features, benefits. Sometimes architects need that kind of information. You can definitely get that over to them. There's also videos, education, trainings that we've done in the past, all on that website. It's a very valuable tool.
All right, so we're going to make sure we choose the correct product, right?
Yep.
We're going to make sure we know the instructions for the product that we're going to use. Now, I guess it's time to use the product, right, Chris?
Yep.
We're going to go install.
Yep, let's get to the site. Let's bring the product and get started.
What's the first mistake that we see when installing polymeric sand?
Yeah, and I think everybody has experiences in the past, but you ever arrive to that job site maybe the next morning, maybe like it was kind of humid, temperature dropped that night, and you show up and the project is wet.
All right, so these contractors all know that you can't put polymeric sand down on wet pavers. It's going to start activating right away.
Correct. Maybe
But-
maybe they go across the project and they blow it well and they kind of dry the surface. I mean, I've seen that quite a bit.
But we also have to be concerned with the joints themselves and the setting bed underneath. So even though the surface of your pavers may be dry, that doesn't mean it's appropriate to install your polymeric sand. If the joints are soaking wet, if that setting bed is soaking wet, as we install and start sweeping that polymeric sand, it's going to be instantaneously activated by the water in the joints. If that happens, we're never going to be able to compact, right? It's already activating before we get to densely pack that polymeric sand. That bottom of the joint is starting to seal itself off and become water resistant, preventing that water from draining out the bottom as we activate it.
Now, Mike, if it were to seal off on the bottom, how would that affect when you actually activate the sand from the top with water?
Well, if the water can't drain through, if we add more water than it takes to wet it from top to bottom, that water's going to start coming back up to the surface. So we could get some kind of bubbling or almost like a worming or caterpillar effect in that sand joint.
Yeah, so you can start to see that sand almost rise up above that chamfered or the beveled edge.
I've also seen jobs where we swept the sand in, thought it was good, went to run that compactor, and water started bubbling up from underneath as we compacted it.
Yeah, that's insane.
Not exactly a good situation, right? You got a mess of activating polymeric sand, got to hose it off, try to clean it off before it dries.
Yeah. So, Zach, are there any questions that have come through just yet?
Yeah, it looks like we got a question right here. It says, I usually water until the water stops soaking into the sand. Is that good or bad?
That's good. We'll touch on the watering more in depth later, but the idea is to try to water the sand as close to top to bottom as possible, right? We're trying to get that water down and saturate all of that polymeric sand. Getting a good initial activation is really key. You might think that over time, rain, water will get underneath there and cure up the rest of the product, but it doesn't work that way.
No.
Our initial activation is key. Watering to the point where it doesn't really soak in anymore is a good kind of rule of thumb.
Yeah. And there's some other things to look for where people tend to stop watering, but we will get into those in a little bit.
All right. So we're going to avoid wet pavers. We're going to avoid potentially wet setting beds. If it rained the night before, pull up a paver. Take your leaf blower, just check that no water's coming out of the joints, that it's relatively dry underneath. And sure, your sand underneath might be damp, but we don't want to be able to squeeze water out of it, right?
No, definitely not. I mean, a lot of cases you can go ahead and blow it with a blower for a while and try to get it dried up, but maybe even plan on coming in later in the afternoon now that the warmer climate has kind of dried everything up. Hopefully humidity has dropped a little bit and your bedding layer is now a little bit drier than it was in the morning.
All right. So moving on through the installation process, we very quickly come to the next common mistake that we see, which is not compacting.
Compaction is key. Let's take a poll. How many of you own a roller compactor?
Well, I hope a lot of people do, because one of the common, excuses that I hear on why a contractor didn't compact is because they were afraid of breaking the material that they're working with, whether that's a natural stone or a tile or even wet cast pavers. They don't want to put that plate compactor on it.
Yeah, and paver manufacturers, they're building bigger and bigger slabs, and putting a vibratory compactor over them can definitely start to crack or fracture some pieces.
Looks like 2/3 of our audience does own a roller compactor, so that's fantastic.
That's good. That's great.
They're probably responsible because they're watching the show on how to avoid polymeric sand mistakes, right?
Yep, exactly.
But that's the best tool to use, right? I've used that on porcelain tile, thin natural stone. I've never broke anything that I was compacting with a roller compactor. It is vital to get that compaction with polymeric sand. If we don't compact, we're opening ourselves up for all kinds of potential problems. So let's talk about why we may have problems if we don't compact, Chris.
Yep. Well, I mean, there's a bunch of things. So number one, you're not getting enough sand into the joint. It's not becoming as dense as we want it to be before activation.
Yeah, so why don't you pretend for a minute that all of these wooden blocks here are sand particles,
Okay.
right? You've swept your polymeric sand into the joints of your pavers, and those sand particles are pretty far apart. That sand is loose and fluffy.
Yep.
So
There's
what
voids.
There's voids, exactly. So we have void space in between our particles. If you're going to install a patio and you put your base rock in, what do?
You
Compact
compact
right?
it.
Same idea with polymeric sand. We want a densely packed polymeric sand joint. We want to make sure that we eliminate this void space, that we push those sand particles close together, getting them to mechanically interlock,
Yep.
as well as bond tighter with that polymer and make sure we don't have as much avenue here for water to get in. So when we compact, what happens, Chris?
It consolidates, and now we have a much more dense joint than we did before.
So we drive all those sand particles together. Now the bond in between the particles is much shorter, much stronger.
Yep.
I don't see any void space, so the water's not going to get into it, right? So we have a much stronger and more water-resistant joint. So skipping that compaction leads to a weak joint that absorbs more water. Water's the enemy of polymeric sand.
Yep.
So we're setting ourselves up for failure if we skip that step. You always have to compact. So that roller compactor is a great option. If you don't have a roller compactor, you can use a hand tamp, rubber mallet.
Yep.
Let's make sure that we are getting some kind of consolidation and compaction one way or another.
Yeah, and I know you all are, you're not just installing concrete pavers, you're doing some, pattern natural stone, and a lot of that natural stone, bluestone, granite, it could be like an inch, inch and a quarter. I've even seen 3/4 inch, which is just terrifying to me. And a lot of people will not compact because they're scared of breaking the pieces. But hey, you got to do something. I have a metal hand tamper and I put a piece of gator base on it that I have all taped up. It's something. It's not the greatest option, but it's something.
It's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. Having somebody go around with a mallet, hitting every single corner, they're going to be sweating like crazy by the end of it, but you got to do it. The last thing you want to do is come back to a project to remove polysand and reinstall polysand. You're making $0 on that visit.
You do have to watch those sweat drops on a hot day, activating the
yeah.
polymeric sand.
Yeah, have
we
a
didn't
couple
put that
rags.
as a mistake, but all right. So compaction is hugely important, and it's important no matter what your joint width is. All the time I hear, well, the joint was wide enough that
wide.
the sand
Yeah.
fell right in.
Don't need it.
Don't need to compact. Here's a 4-inch wide column of sand. As we vibrate it, you can see how much it drops and consolidates. So that was all airspace, empty space, larger distance between those sand particles. You're physically missing sand that's supposed to be in that joint if you don't compact.
Yeah.
Not a good situation, right?
No, and basically to summarize that video right there, less sand is just equals less strength. You want that consolidation. You want to be as dense as possible before you activate. That polymer is going to, activate, become cohesive, expand into the aggregate. We want it to be as dense as possible to create a really thick crust and a really strong crust.
So another excuse that I've heard about compaction is these guys that are doing the hybrid base, clean stone and a number 8 or number 9 chip as their setting bed, and they tell me, when I compact, the sand disappears, so I'm not going to compact.
Yeah, and where I'm from, I'm in Connecticut, and finding like a 3/8 stone is a lot easier to do than finding like a 1/4 inch chip stone. And 3/8, we have an example of that right here. There are quite a few voids in a 3/8 stone.
So we just told you how important compaction is, but if we put our polymeric sand on a number 8 stone, a 3/8 inch chip, and we compact,
It's migrating down, Mike.
it all disappeared. Geez, that's not a good situation, right?
No.
I'm either going to use 5 times as much polymeric sand and most of it's going to disappear into my clean stone, or I'm going to skip compaction and over time my joints are going to fail.
Yeah, most of the time you're just going to stop compacting eventually because you're using way too much polysand, which doesn't help you at all because what if you activate, right, Mike, and you have that crust on the top, and then potentially over time, a lot of that loose sand that doesn't get activated will start to trickle down. What's supporting that crust?
There's nothing underneath
nothing
there.
there.
So we've got empty space. We've lost interlock in between the pavers. you're going to get some cracking, you're going to get some joint failure.
Yep. But if you are able to source that 1/4 inch chip or that number 9 stone, you'll have a little bit better success with the migration.
Right, so number 9 stone has less void space. We put the polymeric sand right on top of that number 9 stone. We compact the same way, and you can see that we haven't lost nearly as much sand. It choked off pretty quickly, right?
Yep, it definitely
So
did.
the number 9 might be more expensive, might be a little bit tougher to find, but it's going to give you much better results as far as your polymeric sand joint goes.
Yep. And there's other jointing options. We have a product called Nitro, in which we're going to talk about in 2 weeks' time from today. So please tune into that, and we'll talk more about the bedding layers, the 3/8 stone, where that might be a more valuable option for you.
All right, so we always have to compact, whether we've got natural stone, tile, concrete pavers, wet cast, whether you've got traditional base or hybrid base, whether the joints are narrow or wide, you always have to compact and consolidate. So figure out some way to do that. If you have a roller compactor, great. If you don't, go buy one, use a mallet or a hand tamp, but we have to compact in order for the polymeric sand to work the way it should.
Okay, Mike. So we're compacted now. Now we have to worry about something else, the joint height, which is definitely a huge mistake that I see pretty often, even to this day.
If I went out to see 10 jobs, I bet 7 of them, 8 of them probably have joints that are overfilled.
That's pretty accurate.
What do we mean by overfilling a joint? Well, flush with the surface is definitely overfilled, Chris.
No, this is not like tile in an interior bathroom or a kitchen. This is going to be set up a little differently. We can take a look at this graphic here and where exactly we want the sand height to be. On all of our products, and even actually all of Polysand that I've seen across the board, you want to be an 1/8 inch below the bottom of that beveled edge or the chamfer. Now, a lot of these paving stones will sometimes have a round edge. Some of those wet cast products that are made to look like natural stone, we want to make sure we're an 1/8 of an inch below that rounded edge, just like you see in that chamfer.
So in many cases, you're an 1/8 of an inch below the chamfer or the rounded edge, but you could be a 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch from the top of that paving stone.
Yeah, you can be pretty low.
And being low is better than being too high, right? Polymeric sands expand a little bit when they get wet. Take a look at this video. It's a little bit exaggerated, but polymeric sands expand as they get wet in that softened state. They rise above the pavers. Now they're definitely subject to abrasion, erosion, foot traffic, vehicles. Not a good situation there.
Yeah, and what I see most common, as we talked about the cycle, right? The process of the cycling, it's made to become flexible. It will absorb that water. It will have some expansion, but if you have sand that's sitting in the chamfer or that beveled edge, it will expand up, and when it comes back down after it's going through that drying process, it usually catches that chamfer and almost like pulls
Peels
that
away from the
crust
edge.
up. And then you have caterpillars going across your entire project, which just won't have any longevity. Water's now going to infiltrate under that crust, and then before you know it, your whole project needs to be redone.
Yep, I wouldn't want to redo my whole project.
No,
so
it's costly,
Let's
Mike.
make sure our joint height is set properly. And this goes back to compaction as well, because if you don't compact, your sand's going to swell even more when it gets wet. So compaction is key. Joint height is key. Let's take a look at our actual example here, right?
Okay.
So I see this all the time, Chris. We've got the chamfer completely filled in. The sand is flush with the surface.
Homeowner wanted it that way, Mike.
Well, if the homeowner wanted their shingles on their roof installed upside down, would you do it?
No.
So why would you install the polymeric sand wrong?
No, listen, this is against our instructions that are on the bag that we showed you earlier. We want that sand to be straight up and down, kind of like what you see on the example right here.
All right, so this is the correct joint. So it's underneath that chamfer, right? We're an 1/8 of an inch below the chamfer, probably a 1/4 inch from the top of the paver. It's going to help us in many ways. So first of all, when we actually water it, what happens? We water the high joint, and water's going to run off right away.
Yeah, listen, in most cases, when you have a high joint such as this one, water is going to hit it, absorb into that top layer, and the rest is going to run right off. Where if we have that sand height lower, 1/8 inch below, water is going to channel over it in this chamfer and then slowly absorb in and create a really thick, nice crust.
All right, so we need the proper sand height for performance. We don't want it to swell above or be subject to vehicular traffic, foot traffic, and erosion. We have to be able to activate it properly. So having that low joint forms almost a funnel for that water to trickle in and properly activate the polymeric sand. And the pavers just look better when that joint height is set lower, right? We install pavers because they're individual units, right? Individual stones. We want that 3-dimensional effect. If you fill the joints up all the way to the surface, we've lost that three-dimensional effect.
We have.
All right. I want to take a look at a paver that doesn't have a uniform edge here, Chris.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more rounded in the overall paver. This is a 6x6 paver. We actually drew a line on this and where we would want, ideally, where we would want your polysand height to be.
Wow, that's like 3/8 of an inch below the top, though, Chris.
It is, but we want the sand to be the same level uniformly going across. A lot of times I see this corner start to get filled up a little bit over the paver.
Oh yeah, there's like a quarter-sized dollop
Yeah.
of polymeric sand sitting on top of the paver.
I'll give that 3 months before that fails.
Yep, prone to peeling away from the
Yep.
surface and deteriorating. But we want to make sure we're at least 1/8 of an inch below the lowest point of the paver. Any rounded edges, natural stone with gator dust.
Yep.
We want to be 1/8 of an inch below the lowest point, not the highest point.
Yeah. Zach, how we doing on questions?
Yeah, we got a question about the base layer. It says, I use open base with a 1/4-inch chip stone, and I've lifted pavers 3 days after the rain, and it's still damp and darker. Is that an acceptable condition to poly sand?
Well, very good question and
really good
very good observation. So I think there's a couple levels to that. So we'll tackle wet setting beds first in general, whether that happens to be sand, stone dust, or chip. We know we shouldn't be using stone dust, right?
Correct.
Traps and holds moisture, all the fines, don't allow water to pass through. But even concrete sand or chip, water is always going to get underneath your hardscape project. Polymeric sand is not permeable, but water is going to seep through the sides. Polymeric sands can get wet. You'll always have water and moisture underneath. That's normal.
It's normal.
That's typical.
Yeah.
Depending on how well you've sloped your base material, that can cause problems. If you have some depressions in your base material, that can cause puddles underneath your hardscape project. If you've got a job site where you just have like 4 or 5 places that always seem to stay wet, right? The pavers stay wet longer, the joints stay dark. That could be because your base wasn't properly leveled and pitched off. Many people make up the difference in their setting bed. They might have an inch here, 3 inches over here, an inch over there. We want to have a uniform setting bed, as close as possible. Set your screed pipe in your base stone. Screed that off with proper pitch and mimic that with a uniform inch of the setting bed material.
And Mike, you've been around for quite a long time. You've been a part of numerous amounts of installs. How often are you seeing contractors out there pitching their sub layer?
Pretty much never.
Okay.
It's good practice though.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so then back to that hybrid base idea, right? So hybrid base, the contractors always tell me it's free draining. I'll never have a water problem.
Yeah, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of other factors when it comes to hybrid base that you have to really think about. Number one is, what are the soil conditions?
Right, if you've got clay soil and you create a reservoir with your clean stone, reservoir fills up with water and it doesn't drain into clay soil.
Yeah, so you have a swimming pool underneath.
Swimming pool.
Yeah.
Swimming pools are nice, but not underneath your pavers.
No, you have a constant wet environment underneath. Yes, it's a free draining stone, but if the water is nowhere to drain to, then you're just essentially have just a swimming pool underneath.
And that water can't go down, so it's going to go up.
It can't go down, and it's going to be humid under there, so that dry poly sand that's getting touched by the sun on the top, it's going to have that draw of that moisture below. It's always going to keep that poly sand wet and potentially fail over time.
In addition to unsuitable soils, you could also use the wrong fabric underneath your hybrid base. So if you use a woven fabric underneath your clean stone, that's like a blue plastic tarp. You're essentially putting a liner underneath that swimming pool and trapping water. So use a non-woven geotextile like our Gator GF 4.4, or plan to have some kind of a drain to daylight to evacuate that water.
Yeah, and later in the show, we have a couple examples of all those scenarios that we'll show you.
So, damp material underneath your pavers, to get back to the question, is normal and expected. But if you can see water, if you can squeeze water out of that bedding layer, then you've definitely got a problem.
Yep, definitely.
All right.
What's next, Mike?
Well, we are going to go into kind of the watering process here.
Yeah, we dabbled in a little bit of that earlier on, but one thing we want to do for the watering process in which we mentioned is we really want to shower it. And that's 30 seconds, 30 square feet.
So we're going to forget that word mist like we talked about, right?
No, this is at a shower setting. All of these nozzles that are sold at the box stores will have different settings on it. We want to make sure we're using the shower setting.
All right, so why is that important? Well, if you don't activate G2 properly, we're going to end up with a thin crust
Thin crust, I see this all the time.
And a thin crust is prone to failure and damage and poor performance.
Yep.
So what are we talking about when we say thin crust? Let's take a look at what we want to see for a crust.
Yep.
And that's something that's like this, maybe an inch, inch and a half thick.
Yep, that's best case scenario right there.
So polymeric sands don't harden all the way through from top to bottom. You're going to end up with a crust of hardened material, activated material, supported by densely packed sand underneath. Now, it's possible that that crust might be more in the neighborhood of a half inch. I'd say half inch is still acceptable.
Half
right?
inch is okay. You're still going to get longevity out of that.
That could be proper performance. But when we start getting into the eighth inch or thinner layers,
No.
it's never going to last.
Yeah, that's going to be an issue for sure. And that could happen from a couple of reasons. We mentioned earlier that you're going to have a problem with the absorption at the top if that bedding layer is wet when you arrive on site and it activates as you're pushing the sand in. Again, that's going to affect that draw or that absorption from the top. It's almost going to have like a bubble that's going to prevent that from really absorbing in. And then a thin layer, just overall, it's going to be weaker. You know, if you do have any movement in the paving stones, it's going to dislodge itself from the paver. And then you're going to have some infiltration of the water just from rainstorms.
And as we kind of touched on earlier, that rapid set technology, rain safe in 15 minutes for the G2 products is a huge advantage, but if we water it wrong, it becomes a disadvantage. So make sure we're doing that one-step watering process, 30 square feet for 30 seconds, getting the water down in there before it starts to reject water.
Yep.
Because if you do the old 3-step watering process, rapid set technology is going to repel your second and third waterings. It's not going to allow that down in there because it's already rain safe.
Yep.
All right, so you want to see what that 3-step watering process gives us?
Sure.
All right, let me get you on camera here. All right, so that old 3-step watering process results in a pretty thin crust. That one's not terrible, but it's certainly not optimal.
Yeah, not bad.
Now, if we watered it a little heavier, what do we end up with here?
Looks like it's a lot thicker crust.
All
there,
right,
Mike.
so that one's pretty good. We're talking about that good inch, inch and a half of activated material, right?
2 inches in some places.
Yeah. So watering is key. 30 for 30 is our tagline. 30 square feet for 30 seconds. Now, that may seem like an awful lot of water. The goal is to water to the point of water rejection, right? As long as it's absorbing water, keep adding water to it. Once it starts to puddle and pond on the surface or run off, that's a sign to kind of back off and ease up.
Yeah, and here's a short little video of a watering process. So you can see here, this is a shower setting, constantly moving that hose back and forth, especially on like wider joints. If you're not constantly moving back and forth, you might have direct contact in one place that might start to loosen that sand if it were to be on the wider side. But overall, it's a one-step watering process. And then I think I'm starting to see a little bit of that white foam come out, Mike.
You mean the polymers?
It's the polymer coming out?
Polymers are washing out of that sand?
Yeah, I think so.
No, they're not, Chris. We do hear that all the time, right?
We do.
We don't want to overwater polymeric sand. We don't want to wash out the polymers. Unless you stick a sprinkler on that project and let it run for 15, 20 minutes, you're not going to wash out the polymers in G2.
Please don't do that.
Yeah, please don't do that. But that is simply a surfactant, that white foam that you see. And the surfactant is in the mix to help pull that moisture down deep into the joint. Once we've densely packed that polymeric sand and eliminated the void space, it's kind of hard to water that joint from top to bottom.
Yeah.
That surfactant helps wick that water down deep into the sand joint. The residual effect are essentially just soap bubbles on the surface.
Yeah. Now, Mike, I've had contractors call me and say, hey, like, I keep watering it. I'm trying to wash all of the soap. I'm trying to wash all the polymer off, but it's surfactant, but it just keeps on coming out. Is it going to stain my project?
Not at all. You can take a look at this quick time-lapse video where we've got lots of the surfactant on the surface, and it simply dissipates and disappears as that project dries out.
Yeah.
So not going to stain your pavers, not going to leave any residue, simply some soap bubbles that are part of the product itself.
Yeah, don't kill yourself and try to continuously wash off the project. Sometimes you're going to be there for half hour trying to get this done. It's not necessary.
All right, so watering, it's pretty simple, but it's different than what we've done in the past with polymeric sands.
Yeah.
And making sure that we understand that, the guys that are on site installing the polymeric sand understand that is key. There's some stubborn people out there.
Sure.
Insist on doing things the way they've always done it, Chris.
Been doing it for 30 years, Mike.
All right, so we're going to follow the instructions on our polymeric sand. That's going to give us a successful install guaranteed, right, Chris?
Yep.
Not necessarily. certainly sets us up for success.
Yeah.
But there are some potential issues on a job site, environmental issues and concerns that we need to take into account. We need to consider when we're planning and building our project to set that polymeric sand up for success.
Yep. And we talked about a few of these earlier, and like soil conditions are key. You know, if you do have a high clay content, I mean, I'm in Connecticut, I have a ton of clay around us. It's like 85% clay. It's really a hard place to install.
Right. As soon as you dig a hole, you're creating that bathtub, that swimming pool. You're creating a hole in the ground where water can't drain out, and it's going to fill up with water one way or another.
Yeah, it might rain one day, you show up, and here's what your project looks like. Odds are that this is going to happen throughout the lifespan of the patio. You know, you're going to have a wet environment underneath because it's just not free draining. It's not going under. Mike, what are some things we can do to try to avoid that?
Well, we're going to have to find some way to get a drain to daylight, get that water out of there. That's a tough one because it didn't look like there was a lot of slope or pitch available. So maybe that would be a better site, more suited to build up out of the ground in some fashion.
Little raised walkway.
So you have to think about where water is going to come from, where it's going to go, and make sure that it's not going into your base, into your project, and keeping that wet all the time.
Yep.
Polymeric sands can cycle, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, but if it's wet, 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 polymeric sands are going to fail.
Yep. We have another situation when it comes to the water not draining as much as we want. A woven textile compared to a non-woven textile, and I think I saw some comments of this in the chat between the difference of them all. Here's a little example we have for the woven textile in a project.
This is that famous hybrid base, right? Clean stone there.
Clean stone.
But why is that clean stone full of water?
Well, they wrap the entire project with a woven textile.
All right, so woven geotextiles, they're the strongest out there in the hardscape world. A lot of guys want to use them because they are so strong, right? It's going to reinforce my project, but it doesn't drain.
Right.
Woven fabrics have almost zero permeability. When they're in contact with stone and soil, some people claim they drain a lot more. That one wasn't draining a lot more, was it, Chris?
No, and I'm pretty sure that was the day after it rained.
That was the day after it rained.
Yeah.
Sitting there, soaking wet. So if you have to use a woven fabric, heavy duty commercial type project, heavy loads, make sure you got a drain out of the lowest point of that excavation.
Yeah.
In all other projects, that non-woven geotextile, the Gator GF 4.4 is probably your better choice. That's going to give you sufficient reinforcement, but great permeability, allowing that water to flow through into the native soils and evacuate from the bottom of your project.
Right, and between woven and non-woven, like you're not sacrificing much strength. Like a lot of people go to woven because it's going to stabilize everything and it's going to support everything nicely, and it does. It definitely does. But a non-woven textile, as far as tensile strength goes, it's not that far off.
Right. So using that non-woven fabric is a great idea. Accounting for drainage, drains to daylight, making sure that your water can escape from your project is going to help the life of that entire project, right? Polymeric sand is going to perform better. You'll have less efflorescence on your pavers, less movement and settling in your base material. So consider that switch to a non-woven fabric there.
Perfect.
And I think we got some questions, Chris.
I think so.
Yeah, they are looking to go back 3 to 5 years after install to resand and reseal. They say that you never really get all the sand out, and does that prevent the new sand from activating properly?
All right, so renovating a job, cleaning the joints out and reinstalling polymeric sand, Chris. It's a messy job.
It's not easy, it's messy, it's tedious, it's a lot of work.
So the best way to clean those joints out is with a pressure washer. Obviously, we have to be careful we're not marking up the pavers, causing any damage, but we have to get that joint cleaned out to a depth of 1.5 inches. Typical pavers 2 3/8.
Yep.
So we're trying to clean out most of that joint, Chris. And out of all the resanding jobs you've been on, what do you typically see for joint depth? Not 1.5 inches.
Yeah, not deep enough typically. And then a lot of times it's really set up in some areas. The crust isn't even out of the joint when we show up the next day to reinstall. But you really want to get that 1.5 inch depth bare minimum for new product to work that we want it to.
Right. If it's shallow, if you got a 1/4 inch of new polymeric sand in there, it's not going to bond well. You don't have a thick enough crust. Eventually, it's going to start peeling right out.
Yep.
So make sure you get that joint cleaned out well, let it dry, and then come in and follow all the steps for a new install, right?
Yeah, definitely don't come back the next day to install your polysand. In no way is that bedding layer and or the bottom of that joint dry at that point.
Any other questions, Zach?
Looks like there is a experience with a loose paver in a driveway, and they keep saying that they resand it, but it's still separating and popping up. And
So the infamous, maybe not this case, but your polymeric sand isn't working because there's a half-inch gap in between my pavers now, Chris.
Yeah, no, those paving stones need to be secured on each other. It's got to be one monolithic system. You can't really rely on the joint material for support in that setting.
You can't at all, right? Polymeric sands are designed to be a cohesive joint material. They're designed to resist weeds, burrowing insects, and erosion. They do help provide interlock in between the pavers, but they don't glue them together. If your pavers are moving, you've got a different problem. You know, whether that's a base failure, an edge restraint failure, there is something else going on. So you need to address that before you can get polymeric sand to work in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully everybody learned something today. You know, we encourage you to pass this on, you know, show your crews, at least print out and share the TDS. Let them know that the instructions are available in English, French, Spanish, Dutch, German, whatever language they prefer. It is really important to choose the correct polymeric sand, to understand the proper instructions for the polymeric sand that you're going to use, and to make sure that your job site is going to dry out and drain well.
Yeah. And one thing at Alliance, you know, we really pride ourselves on the education, hence we do stuff like this, but we have more reps than any other company out there. We want to get on site. We want to help your crews understand how to get it done correctly. Utilize that resource. We will teach your new employees, if they've never done this before, how to get it done the correct way so you don't have issues going forward.
All right. We thank you for joining us. You know, we love heading off problems before they happen.
Yep.
Always a good policy. In 2 weeks, as Chris mentioned, we are doing a show on the Gator Nitro and Nitro X. Those are our resin sands. So we talked about polymeric sands, how they work, how they soften up when they get wet, some of the installation mistakes. Resin sands are becoming really popular because they're darn near foolproof, Chris.
Like minimal issues with these products. They're fantastic.
They don't have any flexibility though, so you do need to learn a little bit about where it's appropriate to use them, where it's not, things to consider with your installation as far as joint width. But resin sands are becoming very popular, and you definitely need to learn about them if you aren't currently using them.
Yeah. Perfect.
Excellent. I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us.